Well, again, Steve here. I just had a thought yesterday, and it might sound kind of strange, but it goes something like this. A poor man equals, or is equivalent to, the female version of, which would be an unhealthy or obese or somehow disproportionate woman physically. And this might sound outrageous, but I started to think about the nature of men and women on a very deep historic level, right? And I think a lot of times if we look at the history of ourselves as a species, we can learn about ourselves and why it is that we behave in certain ways, or we want to, or we tend to. We have drives in certain ways, right? Now, if we think about it in terms of how it is that we live our lives, what it is that we're going for, right? Individually, as human beings, among other human beings. Well, we want to eat, right? We want to eat so that we can go on living because we have the will to live. Most of us, anyway. We want to do something else. On a very deep level, we have drives to mate. And in so driving, we create other human beings. We're part of the process of creating other human beings. Well, what is it that attracts? There's a lot of things, probably, or a number of things, perhaps. But from a man's perspective, a lot of times men get accused of using women as objects of sex, right? Well, that's what they are, right? I mean, it's like they'd be like looking at, for a man, that's as obvious as a hungry guy looking at a steak dinner or something, and somebody saying, well, that's just an object of your hunger, you know. It's what it is, right? So, and probably the history behind it, the reason why a man wants a healthy-looking woman, which is typically throughout the ages a rather rounded woman. Round hips is symbolic of, or is indicative, perhaps, of fertility, higher level of fertility, ability to bear children and pass those children through the birth canal, those children through the birth canal, and large breasts, or larger, or decent breasts. Those indicate the ability to breastfeed children, so that the genes can be passed on. Now, people aren't aware of this; they just react to a hard-on or something. I mean, to certain imagery, but that's got to be something to it. And on the other side, a woman, typically, in our history, wants a man who can sustain her, right? Because traditionally, if you think about it, the woman's most productive years was spent pregnant and or lactating for perhaps 20 years, right? Because they would get pregnant almost as often as they could, and they were breastfeeding those children. So it's like, you're not even done breastfeeding one and you're having another one, and then another one, and half those babies would die. So a woman who is pregnant, heavily pregnant, and breastfeeding can't really go out and hunt and do all the gardening and harvesting, although they did massive amounts of work in the house, around the house, skinning, all tanning, all that sort of stuff, close in stuff. But they needed the man for probably protection and for resources. So therefore, the man with what's more important traditionally than looks and physicality is abilities in terms of being able to bring home the bacon, right? That's why I say in equivalency, in attraction, right? In equivalency, probably the man's resources or his riches are similar to the woman's beauty in terms of her overall health pointers. I don't know if this is absolutely true, or even if it's even remotely true, or if it's completely crazy, but it seems what makes sense to me, by having observed, learned a bit, um, looked at myself, talked to others, etc., as to forming an idea of the foundation of why it is that men and women behave in ways that they do. I think a lot of this can be explained just by our biological history, because of the necessities to behave in certain ways for our survival as tribes and families. The reproductive process is incredibly important for the species. It is incredible as eating for the individual. In order for the individual to survive, he or she's got to eat. In order for society to survive, he and she got to mate. And that has been the case since time immemorial, since, sentient beings have been alive on this planet. And I suspect it'll be the case for some time going forward. Um, whatever it's worth, I think that along the lines of improving the quality of our lives, the more we sort of connect the dots, and we have a greater understanding then of why we do with things we do, potentially, and to be philosophical about it. In other words, to look at it with open eyes, open minds, and to use logic, reason, and evidence to form our analysis, our reasoned analysis. That seems to lead to greater truth within ourselves and amongst others, and I think greater happiness and greater quality of life in the end. Hope this is helpful. Steve here again. Great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.